Do you have an opinion, scientific opinion, about what the trajectory of the bullet's travel would have been that struck Rusty Sneiderman?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell us about that?
The various gunshot wounds, starting with number 1, the trajectory is left to right, front to back, slightly downward. Number 2, in the lower part of the right chest, left to right, front to back, slightly downward. Number 3, abdomen, left to right, front to back, downward. Number 4, in the lower right abdomen, right to left, slightly upward. Then one on number 5, the grazed wound, we can't tell.
So, I'll give you a hypothetical, if
Yes,
it's okay
sir.
with you. If someone, would it be possible, it's not so much a hypothetical as a question, would it be possible for Mr. Sneiderman to have been laying down when he was shot in this case, based on your examination?
Yes, if the front part of his body were exposed to the weapon, he could have been lying down.
Okay. Would it have been possible for him to have been lying on his stomach, though?
No,
Okay. And why do you say that?
because all of the bullets enter on the front side of the body. Clearly, the front side of the body is down on the ground. There's no way for that to happen.
Okay. All right. Can we publish 114, starting with the first one in the sequence? And if you would step down and tell us, just use the pointer and tell us what we're looking at.
This would be what we call an identification photo. This is one that we take on virtually all cases. A facial photograph that also depicts the location that the autopsy was performed, which was the DeKalb County Medical Examiner, and the case number that is unique to this case.
All right. Next photograph in the sequence, please. All right, and what are we looking at here?
This photograph shows from a distance the gunshot wound that I call number 1 in the left side of his neck. It also depicts some heroic efforts made by the medical personnel trying to save his life. This is called a thoracotomy incision, in which they attempt to drain any blood that might be in the chest and sometimes manually help the heart to beat.
The next photograph in the sequence. All right, so what are we looking at?
This is a close-up photograph of this gunshot wound that I call number 1 under the left side of his jaw. This would be his left ear here. The wound doesn't project very well in this photograph, but it is a kind of complex wound. The hole made by the bullet is here. We have something of an abrasion on the lower part. And there's also this black discoloration of the skin here, which is caused by the muzzle flash, the fire that escapes the end of the barrel of the gun, and is also caused by the gunpowder that is burnt into soot that gets deposited in the skin around the edges of the wound and deep into the wound.
What does that tell you about what you call the range of fire, or the distance that the firearm would have had to have been from his actual neck?
This wound represents what's called a contact range wound. It means that the end of the barrel, the muzzle of the weapon, was in contact with his skin when it was fired.
So, in layman's terms, point blank.
Yes.
And that is wound number 1?
Yes.
All right. Next slide.
This is the one that I call wound number 2. This is in the lower part of the chest, just a little bit to the right of center. There's also an incision here that looks to me to be made by medical personnel, and this one we've already discussed. So this is the one I call number 2. Although there's a little bit of a dark discoloration at the edge of the wound, this was caused by drying of the exposed tissue under the skin in the cold, dry air of the morgue cooler.
Next slide, please.
Just a close-up of that same wound here in the lower right chest, and also, as I said, the dark discoloration. That does not represent soot. I know this because I did microscopic studies of the gunshot wounds looking for the presence of gunpowder particles in them. Only the gunshot wound in the neck showed any evidence of gunpowder, the others did not.
And you mentioned the other wounds is what you mentioned. Are you able to tell the jury, give the jury any estimate of range of fire or the distance that the weapon was from Mr. Sneiderman's body on the other wounds?
Yes and no. what I term an indeterminate range wound. If the weapon is far enough away from the target, in this case Mr. Sneiderman, that gunpowder particles can no longer strike his body, then from that point on, which is generally 2 feet or so with a handgun, 2 feet to as far as the bullet will fly, all that we will see is the hole made by the bullet. And I cannot tell how far away it is. I know it wasn't very, very close because there's no gunpowder on it, but I can't tell you how far it could have been.
Is it fair to say that the shots that caused the other wounds, when I say the other wounds, I mean not the wounds that are not depicted in on the diagram as wound 1, would have had to have been at least more than 2 feet?
Generally speaking, yes.
Okay, but beyond that, you cannot tell.
Correct.
All right. Next slide, please.
The ruler here is framing the gunshot that I call number 3. This is where the bullet enters the body and the upper part of the abdomen. As we mentioned before, this particular bullet, like the other 2, travels from his left to his right through his body. This one goes through the upper part of the abdomen and exits the right side of his body.
Next picture, please.
This is a close-up of that same wound. We also have some dark discoloration again that once again is caused by drying of the tissues exposed where the skin has been interrupted.
Okay, next slide, please.
The ruler is framing a wound that's on the right side of his abdomen in approximately this location. This is the site where the bullet that entered, I call number 3, in the upper part of the abdomen, exited his body on the right side.
The next slide, please.
The ruler here is framing the gunshot wound that I call number 4. This is a little right of his navel, his umbilicus. This particular wound was different from the others in that it traveled from his right to his left in a slightly upward trajectory in his body. And the next photograph, I think, shows a closer
Okay, so let's go to the
point.
Let's go to the next photograph.
Same thing. We see the same thing with this wound. There's some drying tissues exposed where the skin is interrupted just because of exposure to cool, dry air.
All right, let's go to the next photograph.
The ruler frames this wound in the lower left back. This is the his buttocks area. It's left and right. This is the lower left part of the back, just above the pelvis, above the hip, the back, and this is where the bullet had entered in the right lower abdomen, exited his body in his lower left back.
So what is depicted is essentially an exit wound.
This is an exit wound, yes.
All right. Next slide, please.
Number 5 shows a number of things, but primarily the ruler is framing the grazed gunshot wound that is on the inside of his forearm, his left forearm, just below the crease in the elbow. I think the next photograph is a closer view.
Let me ask before we go to that photograph. Do you have any idea how the graze wound could have happened? Would it have necessarily been a graze, or could it have been an exit wound? Also, what are we talking about here?
It may have been caused by a different bullet from all the other wounds. It may have grazed across his arm before it struck him in the chest or in the abdomen or in the lower abdomen. It may have even grazed across his arm as it came out his back. It went across his forearm. Or, as I said, it may be an independent gunshot altogether.
So what I'm hearing you saying is that you don't necessarily know if it was an independent gunshot or if it was one of the exit wounds that grazed him.
Part of one of the others, that's right.
All right. Is it fair to say that you could have 4 shots versus 5 if that were the case?
Yes, the weapon could have been discharged 4 times and account for the 5 gunshot wounds that I see.
All right. Next slide, please.
This is a close-up of the wound. Sometimes if they're a little bit deeper, we can get an idea of which direction the bullet was traveling as it grazed across the skin in a tangential fashion. This one is so superficial that I can't tell which way it's traveling.
And could you bring us the next slide, please?
This is a photograph of the left outside forehead of Mr. Sneiderman. What we see here is an abrasion, scrape. This happened when the outer part of his forehead contacted a rough surface at some point.
You can have a seat. Will the last photograph be consistent with the fall?
Yes.
Can you tell us whether or not Mr. Russell Sneiderman, the victim in this case, died as a result of being shot several times?
Yes, he did.
Can you tell us whether or not these gunshot wounds were survivable?
The one through his neck may have been, had he not received the others. The graze wound, obviously, in the forearm was superficial and not life-threatening. The gunshot wounds that I call 2, 3, and 4 through his chest and through his abdomen would all be fatal without immediate medical attention.
Your Honor, if I may have just a second.
You may. Go back on the record.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right. Whose witness is this? Mr. Land, you may cross-examine if you wish.
Good morning, Dr.
Good morning.
Thank you. If I understood you correctly on your direct examination, your ordering of the wounds 1 through 5 is just you went from top of the body to the bottom, correct?
Yes.
And so you can't tell exactly the order of the wounds, correct?
Correct.
Nor can you tell the positioning of the parties, the Mr. Sneiderman who was shot or the shooter, correct?
Only one in relation to the other. The trajectory of the weapon, the gunshot wounds tells you where the weapon was
Right.
In relation to his body, and that's all I know.
Okay. And you said that wound number 1, the one to the neck, was what you consider a contact wound, correct?
Yes.
And that trajectory was left to right, downward, and front to back.
Yes.
Correct? And that one, there was no exit wound for that, correct?
Correct.
There was a bullet fragment left in his
And
body.
the bullet was a little deformed, but yes, it was still in his body.
Wound number 2 was one of the indeterminate range gunshot wounds, correct?
Yes.
And you can't tell how far away the shooter was, just that he was at least 2 feet away.
Yes.
And all of the wounds were in a downward direction with the exception of wound number 4, correct?
Correct.
Do you know if the fragments or the bullets were recovered from wounds number 3 and 4, where there were exit wounds?
I did not recover them.
Okay. And they were not brought to you?
No.
As a part of your examination, you measured the height and weight of the deceased person, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Sneiderman was about 6'2" in height, correct?
Yes.
So for the wounds that were in a downward direction, the weapon would have had to have been higher than the wound, correct?
Either that or he's bent over in a fashion that would result in a more downward trajectory in his body than if he'd been standing straight upright.
Okay. So it's possible that some of these downward direction wounds were created if he were falling to the ground.
Potentially.
If somebody is shot and they're shot while they're up against some hard surface like the ground,
Yes.
there would be some evidence of that, correct?
There usually is.
Okay, there would be what you'd call a tag or
We did tend to see an
marker.
abrasion ring around the exit wound, which is what we usually see with entrance wounds. We call that a shored exit wound, where there's some material, some object, something that's keeping the skin pressed as the bullet comes through. It can create an abrasion or a scrape as the bullet comes out of the body.
Okay. And typically in those situations, you would expect that the bullet or fragment would be recovered.
Well, not necessarily. It's not uncommon for them to strike the ground and be ricocheted and be lost. Sometimes they'll be retained in the body, that they can't make it out, and other times if there's just enough space, then they are lost.
Okay. There was no evidence in this case that of any short exit wounds, correct?
Well, yes and no. There's a little bit of a scrape around gunshot wound number 4, the exit wound in the lower left back. On the outside, or what we call the lateral edge, the skin is a little abraded there. It's not obviously a short exit wound, perhaps it is.
And that's the wound that was an upward direction, correct?
Slightly upward, yes.
And so the position of the weapon would have had to have been most likely below the wound.
In some fashion, the two were, the weapon and Mr. Sneiderman were in relation so that the bullet was going in an upward fashion within the body, but that doesn't mean I know if it was going upward in space.
Okay. And it's your opinion that Rusty was shot from the front, correct?
Yes.
It's not shot in the back.
The one I don't know about is the Gray's wound. I don't know where his arm was when he received that, but the other four are in the front.
And changing tactics a little bit, do you know, are you familiar with, and I may or may not pronounce this correctly, diphenhydramine citrate?
Yes.
What is that?
Diphenhydramine is Benadryl.
And is that something you can get over the counter?
Yes, it's an antihistamine. It's a common cold remedy.
And is OTC a common And is that something you can get over the counter?
Yes, it's an antihistamine. It's a common cold remedy.
And is OTC a common the abrasion on Rusty's forehead? You said that would have been consistent with a fall, correct?
That's one way it could happen, yes.
You don't believe that that was caused by a bullet?
No.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have, Dr. Dunn.
You're welcome.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Lawyers may not done be released in treatment today. I'll be on to the management.
No objection.
Free to go. Have a safe trip back to Mississippi.
Alabama, actually. Please don't send me that far. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you.
Your Honor, the state calls Donald Sneiderman.
Go ahead and have a seat for me. Go ahead and raise your right hand. You solemnly swear affirm that the testimony shall give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Then lower your hand. Please state and spell your name for the record.
My name is Donald Sneiderman, DONALD
Mr. Sneiderman, who is Russell Sneiderman to you?
He's my son.
And did Rusty have a nickname, or did Russell have a nickname?
We called him Rusty when he was born. Russell was his name we put on the birth certificate, but he was always Rusty.
And do people outside your family call him Rusty too?
Everybody called him Rusty.
Can you speak up a little bit for me so the court reporter can hear you?
I'll try.
All right. Mr. Sneiderman, how old was Rusty when he died?
36.
And where did he live at the time that he died?
He lived at that 4849 Manjack Court.
Okay. And you got it right.
I got it right.
4849 Manjack Court. Okay. And who did he live with?
He lived with his wife, Andrea, and his two children, Sophia and Ian.
I don't need the street address, but where in the country did you live at that time in November 2010?
We lived in Beechwood, Ohio.
Okay. And who did you live with?
I lived with my wife, Marilyn.
Okay. She's here in the courtroom today?
Yes.
How close was your relationship with Rusty?
Real close.
Despite the geographical distance between you, how often did you see him or how often did you speak to him?
We talked to him probably every day, at least once. He taught us to use Skype.
Tell the jurors, if they're not familiar, what's Skype?
It's a two-way communication system over the internet where you can see the person that you're talking to and hear him. We usually had breakfast and dinner with him. They would sit at their dining table and we would sit in our family room and talk to him every day.
And the kids too?
Kids too.
Are you familiar with, or do you know Rusty and Andrea's financial situation in or around November 2010?
Yes.
How do you know that?
I'm a retired certified public accountant, and I did his tax returns. We had a common shared broker that did his investments and my investments, and we talked about it all the time.
Okay. If you know, what was Rusty doing for employment in the fall of 2010?
He was trying to create a new business where he would have a cell phone answering system using some celebrity. They were working on the technology to do that. He talked to lots of people about it.
Okay. Was he exploring some other projects as well?
Always looking for something to do, different.
Okay. Knowing as you do Rusty's financial situation, was the family's finances, to the best of your knowledge, were they comfortable at that time?
Yes.
Okay. Did Rusty have an income from any of these business ventures in November 2010?
No.
Despite the fact that Rusty didn't have an income at that time, were they comfortable financially?
Yes.
What was Andrea doing at that time for employment?
She worked for General Electric.
November 18th, 2010.
Okay.
Where were you?
I was at home.
At home in Ohio?
Yes.
Okay. And who was in the house with you, if anyone?
Maryland.
That's your wife?
Yes.
All right. Did you have any contact with Rusty on the morning of November 18th, 2010?
We had breakfast with him.
Okay. You remember what time? Was that on the phone or was that Skyping as you described it?
We had it on Skype. He left about 10 minutes to 9 to take Ian to school.
Before Rusty left at 10 minutes to 9 to take Ian to school, how long had you all been talking on Skype on the computer?
Probably 15, 20 minutes.
And was that typical?
Yeah.
Who was there when you were talking to him?
Just Marilyn and I, Rusty and Ian.
Rusty and Ian? Okay. Andrea wasn't there?
No.
And Sophia wasn't there?
No, she has gone to school.
Okay. Tell me about your conversation with Rusty and Ian.
It was just, what are you going to do today? Going to have a good time at school, that kind of stuff. It was just what we did.
How old was Ian at that time?
2.
And you said the conversation lasted about 10, 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Do you know where Rusty was going once he hung up from
He had a
talking to you?
meeting to go to.
All right. Was he going to go anywhere first?
Just to drop Ian off at school, and then he was going to go to his meeting.
Okay. Do you know where Ian went to school?
Dunwoody Prep.
Did Rusty seem any different to you that morning?
Nope.
Any worried at all?
Nope.
Concerned about anything?
Nope.
Is there anything about your conversation with Rusty or his demeanor that made you think there was anything different or unusual about this day?
Just like every other day.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Mr. Sneiderman, I'm showing you what has been previously marked as State's Exhibit number 128. Do you recognize State's Exhibit number 128?
Yes.
And how do you recognize it?
That's a picture of Rusty. He's wearing a football jersey I bought him.
You bought it?
Yeah, he's a Browns fan.
Okay. Does State's Exhibit number 128, does that fairly and accurately depict the way Rusty looked the last time you saw him on the morning?
Yes.
Yes, it does. Your Honor, at this time I move State's Exhibit number 128 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Submitted without objection, you may proceed to adjourn if you wish.
Thank you. Can we show that, please? That's Rusty.
That's Rusty.
Okay. Mr. Simon, when was the first time you knew that there was something wrong on November 18, 2010?
About 9:30, Andrea called and said that Rusty had been shot.
All right, don't tell me what anybody told you, okay?
Okay.
You got a call from Andrea?
Yes.
What, if anything, did you do after you got a call from Andrea about 9:30?
I waited a little bit of time,
Minutes, hours?
minutes, maybe 15, because she said she was going to call me back. And I called Dunwoody Prep.
All right. Don't tell me what anybody told you. After you talked to somebody did you talk to somebody at Dunwoody Prep?
Yes.
After you talked to somebody at Dunwoody Prep, what, if anything, did you do?
I sent an email to Steve, who was going away he was on a trip to Hawaii.
Who's Steve?
My son.
Okay, Rusty's brother?
Yes.
Okay. Did you call anybody else after you talked, or after you hung up from Dunwoody Prep?
I called the gentleman who I had been talking to on the phone, and he had called me, and I was too upset to talk to him, so I called him back to apologize. I called a cousin of mine who I'm really close with. And that was about it.
Mr. Sneiderman, did there come a time on the morning of November 18th that you talked to anybody at Atlanta Medical Center?
Yes, I called down there and I talked to a doctor who told me that Rusty had come in and he had been shot multiple times and he could not survive.
And what, if any, arrangements did you make after you learned that information?
We had plans, knowing that he had been shot, that we were going to Atlanta. We just added some extra clothes for a funeral and headed for Atlanta.
You came that day?
That day.
Mr. Sneiderman, before you got those series of calls and that information, had you ever heard the name Hemy Neuman?
Yes.
And who had you heard that name from?
Rusty had told me on one of his discussions over Skype that he was meeting with Andrea's boss. He was looking for a new job and wanted some help from Rusty as contacts and things like that.
Okay. Had you ever met the defendant before Rusty was shot?
No.
Did you meet him after?
Yes.
Tell the jurors, first of all, did you have a funeral service for Rusty?
Yes.
And how long after his death did you have a funeral service?
He died on Thursday. The funeral was on Sunday.
Okay. And did you also have any other sort of memorial or service for Rusty during the week or so after his death?
Yeah, we said Shiva.
Okay, tell the jurors what's Shiva.
Shiva is a mourning period that usually takes place in your home. Your friends and relatives and things like that come and visit and
Is that
talk
part
to
of the
you.
Jewish tradition?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's evening and morning services in the home, and it's just a quiet time where people mourn and have some comforting friends over, that's all.
Okay. Now, you told the jurors there was a time after Rusty's death that you did meet the defendant. Can you tell the jurors when that was and what the circumstances were?
One of the evenings of the Shiva, a group of people from GE came, and he was there, and my wife Marilyn introduced him to me. We talked for maybe 30 seconds, and then he left.
Anything unusual about the conversation?
Nope.
Did he touch you, or did you exchange?
He shook my hand.
You see the defendant who shook your hand in the courtroom this morning?
Yes.
Can you identify him for me?
He's the man in the yarmulke with the beard.
Was he wearing a yarmulke and a beard the day you saw him?
No.
Your Honor, may the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant?
Record may still reflect.
Thank you, Mr. Sneiderman. I don't have any other questions.
Ms. Sampson, you may cross-examine if you wish.
Your Honor, no questions.
Lawyers, may this witness be released in excuse for subpoena, or do you want him to remain in the subpoena?
You may be released from the state.
Thank you, sir. All right, next witness.
Your Honor, subject to a tendering and double-checking of the exhibits, the state rests.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the state has rested at this point in time. Let me just let you step into the jury room for a brief break. All right, lawyers and parties, you may be seated. All right, at this point in time, the state of Georgia has rested this case. Is the defense ready to proceed?
Judge, I have a motion to make before we go any further in terms of witnesses. We have our first witness who will be available after lunch.
Sure.
At this point, the defense would make a motion for a directed verdict of acquittal.
Did you want to articulate any more than this sentence?
Not at this time, no.
Response?
Your Honor, I think the evidence has clearly shown, and a rational jury could clearly find that the uncontested evidence indicates that the defendant had a motive to kill the victim, Rusty Sneiderman. He planned to kill Rusty Sneiderman. He did, in fact, kill Rusty Sneiderman. He covered up the fact he killed Rusty Sneiderman, and that's the state's evidence. We believe the case should go to the jury.
All right. Anything else on the defense?
No.
All right. All right, ladies and at this point in time, I am going to deny the motion for directed verdict at this point in time. The case will proceed at this point in time. Mr. Land, at this point, did you want me to go ahead and advise your client of his right to testify? All right. Mr. Newman, if you can stand, please. If you can raise your right hand, you solemnly swear affirmative evidence you want to provide the true self you got.
Yes, sir.
You may lower your hand. If you could just state your name for the record.
Hemy Neuman, H-E-M-Y-N-E-U-M.
Mr. Newman, you have been indicted and charged with an indictment here in the state of Georgia, and it charges you with the offense of malice murder. We are on trial, and the jury has been selected, and they have been impaneled. You have a right to testify in your own trial. It's completely up to you on whether or not you want to exercise your constitutional right to testify. Only you can decide whether or not you want to testify. Do you need any additional time to consult with your lawyers on whether or not you want to exercise your right to testify?
No, sir.
All right. Are you ready to tell me whether or not you want to exercise your constitutional right to testify?
I am ready.
To give me an answer. All right. Do you want to exercise your constitutional right to testify?
No, sir.
All right. If at any time you change your mind, you're more than welcome to do that. Just let your lawyers know, and they will bring it to my attention. But it's completely your decision on whether or not you testify during the course of this trial. You may be seated.
Thank you.
All right, lawyers, based upon the fact that it's been brought to my attention that the defense will not be ready until after the lunch break, which is fine, what I will do is bring the jury out and give them a lunch break and give them instructions at that point in time. Lawyers, would you approach momentarily? All right, Deputy Gear, let's bring him in on the 7 to lunch, please. Thank you. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. You may be seated in a seat. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. You may be seated in any seat. All right, Lord, you may be seated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to do is go ahead and send you to lunch. At this point in time, the state has rested. The next portion of the case will return attention to the defense, and we will resume after this break. When I give you this break, do not discuss the case. I'll allow anyone to discuss the case with you. If you do decide to have a meal here in downtown Decatur, do not sit next to anyone who may or may not be discussing the case. As I mentioned to you before, either A, move away from them, or B, tell them to move away from you, but do not sit next to someone who may or may not be discussing the case. Once I release you for this break, do not remain upon the floor. I don't want you to interact with anyone you should not interact with or see anything you should not see. Do not read or look at any media coverage pertaining to this case. Do not go upon the internet and do any research about this case. Do not blog or write about this case while it's ongoing. Do not go to any location that may or may not have been made reference to. All the evidence must come to you in the form of sworn testimony from this witness stand and any evidence that's introduced during the course of the trial. You're more than welcome to bring something to snack and eat with you during the afternoon session. You can have something to drink during the jury box. You cannot eat in the jury box. Excuse me, do not consume any alcoholic beverages during the lunch break. Please turn your cell phones in the off position. But this is your opportunity, as a determined officer, you can come back. But this is your opportunity to check your messages and communicate with anyone you want to communicate with. As I may have mentioned to you, the lawyers and the parties cannot talk and interact with you. I don't want you to think they're being rude or discourteous. I'm going to let you go a little bit earlier than I normally do, but we're still going to come back at 1:30. It's just that I just need to arrange some things, which is fine. So you're going to have an extra 10 minutes on this break that you normally don't have, but which is fine. And as I've mentioned to you before, you can go anywhere you want to go, do whatever you want to do, just physically be back in the jury room at 1:30. Now, as I always mention to you, just give yourself enough time. If you do pull your car to the parking garage so you can park, walk through the middle of the detective, come back inside, leave notepads there in the jury room, just turn face down, and no one's going to look at your notes but you. All right, I will see you back at 1:30. 1:30 today. Following Justice Deputy Garrett. Lawyers and parties in recess till 1:30. All rise. You may be seated.
Kelly?